Twins were sold to a mountain man as punishment by their father. In the snow outside, two children stand shivering. But behind the laughter in the saloon and the whispers in the church pews, there's a truth no one dare speak. These twins are more than orphans now. Snow drifts deep, hoofbeats echo off the pass, and shadows gather at the edge of the cabin light. The man who bought them will have to, not for gold, but for the lives that just landed in his hands. Before we begin, send a quick wave in the comments. Tell me your city, your country, your vibe. As Elias guided his team through the thickening snow, wind howled down from the high peaks, driving icy needles against his face. He glanced back at the twins huddled beneath his buffalo coat. Their faces were pale smudges in the gathering dusk, their eyes wide and watchful. The girl Lily clutched her rag doll closer. Her brother Luke kept one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. Neither had spoken a word since leaving town. The silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the steady clip-clop of hooves and the soft whisper of snow against leather. Elias cleared his throat. "Reckon we've got another hour before we reach the cabin." His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "Got some stew warming on the stove, and a proper bed made up in the back room." The twins exchanged glances, but remained silent. Elias didn't push for a response. He'd seen that look before in young colts, fresh caught from the wild, watching to see if the hand-offering feed held a whip behind its back. The road wound higher into the mountains, the wheels crunching through fresh powder. Pine boughs hung low and heavy with snow. A red-tailed hawk screamed somewhere in the white sky, making Lily jump. Luke's arm tightened around her. "Your ma?" Elias said carefully, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "She was Shoshone, wasn't she?" Another shared look between the twins. Then Lily gave a small nod. "How'd you know?" "Recognize the beadwork on your doll." Elias gestured with his chin. "Fine work. Your ma teach you that pattern?" She started to. Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "Before she died last winter," Luke stiffened beside her. Elias saw the boy's jaw clench, just like it had in the trading post. Grief was still raw there, an open wound. "I'm sorry," Elias said simply. He let the words settle, then added, "My Sarah's been gone 3 years now. Some days that empty space feels big as the whole territory." The confession seemed to surprise them. Lily leaned forward slightly. "What happened to her?" "Fever took her." Elias adjusted his grip on the reins. "Nothing the doctor could do. Left me alone with this ranch, and more questions than answers." The trail narrowed as they climbed higher. Snow was falling steadily now, thick flakes catching in the horses. "Why'd you do it?" Luke's voice was sudden and sharp. "By us, I mean—" Elias took his time answering, guiding the team around a fallen log, "because what your PA was doing wasn't right, and sometimes a man's got to stand against wrong, even if he stands alone." "But why us?" Luke pressed. "You don't even know us." "No," Elias agreed. "Besides," he added quietly, "your ma's people and mine got history. Not all of it good. Reckon maybe this is a chance to make something right?" The twins fell silent again. Digesting this, the wind moaned through the pines, and somewhere in the gathering dark, a coyote called to its mate. Finally, the cabin came into view, a solid structure of hand-hewn logs with a stone chimney that sent wood smoke curling into the white sky. Light gleamed warm and yellow through the front window. Elias pulled the team to a stop in the shelter of the barn. "Home," he said simply, then caught himself. "Least it's shelter for tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." He helped the twins down from the wagon, noting how they stayed close together, how their eyes darted between him and the cabin door. Trust would take time. He knew that. But for now, they were safe and warm, and sometimes that had to be enough. Inside, the cabin was plain but tidy. A pot of bean stew bubbled on the iron stove. A well-worn quilt draped the back of a rocking chair. On the mantel, a single photograph in a wooden frame showed a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He ladled stew into 3 bowls, set them on the table with thick slices of cornbread. The twins ate carefully at first, then, with growing hunger as they realized no one would snatch the food away. "There's more if you want it," Elias told them, breaking his own cornbread. Lily looked up from her bowl. "What if Pa comes looking?" "Let him." Elias's voice was quiet but firm. "He made his choice, in front of witnesses, and I mean to honor the deal I made. just not the way he intended. "What do you mean?" Luke asked. "Mean I aim to give you a safe place, food, shelter, schooling when spring comes, but you ain't property to be bought and sold. You're free to stay or go as you choose." He met their eyes steadily. "That's the only promise I can make right now. That, and I'll do my best to see you get a fair chance at whatever future you want to build." The twins exchanged another of those speaking looks. Then Lily nodded slowly, some of the wariness leaving her face. "Thank you, Mr. McCord. Elias," he corrected gently. "Just Elias will do fine." Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping the cabin in a soft white blanket. Inside, the stove ticked and popped, spreading its warmth through the room. 3 bowls of stew steamed on the table, and for the first time since leaving town, the silence felt a little less heavy. The wagon creaked and groaned as it climbed. The snow-packed trail, runners cutting deep tracks in the fresh powder. Elias kept a firm grip on the reins, his weathered hands steady despite the cold, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. When they finally reached the cabin, Elias helped them down from the wagon. Their boots crunched in the snow as he guided them toward the door, noting how they trembled despite the heavy coat. Inside, he quickly hung their wet jackets near the pot-bellied stove where they could dry. The one-room cabin stretched out before them, filled with the familiar sense of wood smoke and worn leather. Lily's eyes darted around the space, taking in the neat rows of preserved foods in glass jars that lined the rough-hewn shelves. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and well-maintained tools occupied their places on the walls. Luke's attention fixed immediately on the Winchester rifle mounted above the door, his expression unreadable. "Sit yourselves down," Elias said, moving to the stove. He lifted a heavy pot of beans and set it on the iron surface, then pulled a fresh loaf of bread from his stores and sliced it thick. The knife thunked against the wooden cutting board with each cut. "Eat," he told them, sliding the plate of bread across the table. The twins didn't need to be told twice. They ate carefully at first, then with growing hunger as the warmth of the cabin began to seep into their bones. Elias busied himself with small tasks, giving them space to eat without feeling watched. When night fell, he made up a cot near the stove, padding it with extra blankets against the cold. The twins curled up together like puppies in a den, their faces finally peaceful in sleep. Elias settled into his own bed, listening to the wind whistle through the eaves until sleep took him. Dawn arrived with a chorus of sounds, the rooster's sharp cry cutting through the constant moan of the mountain wind. Elias was already up, coffee pot bubbling on the stove when the twins stirred. He poured himself a cup and set about making a pot of thick oatmeal for breakfast. "Got to haul firewood today," he told them as they ate. The trip into town was necessary, but uneasy. Elias felt the weight of stairs as they made their way down the main street. Outside the saloon, a group of miners paused in their conversation to watch the wagon pass, their expressions dark with speculation. Marshal Harlan intercepted them near the general store, his badge catching the weak winter sunlight. "Need a word, McCord?" he said, gesturing Elias aside. The twins stayed in the wagon, watching with worried eyes. "You've made trouble," Harlan said in a low voice, once they were out of earshot. "Wyatt owes money to the wrong sort. Men who don't take kindly to having their collateral sold out from under them. Elias met the marshal's concerned gaze steadily. "Wasn't right what he was doing?" "No, it wasn't," Harlan agreed. "But that don't mean there won't be consequences. Watch your back, McCord." Elias simply shrugged, but he noted the marshal's warning. The stares from the miners took on a sharper edge as he loaded the wagon with supplies and firewood. By late afternoon, dark clouds were rolling in from the mountains. They started the journey home with snow already stinging their faces, the wind picking up strength. The twins helped him unload the wagon in silence, their movements quick and efficient despite the cold. That evening, as steam rose from bowls of hot stew, Lily's voice broke the quiet. "Mr. McCord," she whispered, her fingers worrying at the edge of her bowl. "Can I tell you something?" Elias nodded, keeping his movements slow and calm, like approaching a spooked colt. "Course you can." "Mama had a box," she said, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. She kept it hidden under a loose board in the floor. "There were papers inside, important ones," she said. "Ones I wasn't supposed to see." Luke's head snapped up at this, his eyes wide. "Lily, you never told me. I only saw it once," she continued, her gaze distant with memory. Mama was reading them late at night, crying. When she saw me watching, she made me promise never to tell Pa about them. Elias kept his voice gentle. Do you know what kind of papers they were? Lily shook her head. But they had fancy writing on them, and some had red seals. Mama said they were about the land, our people's land. Her fingers tightened around her bowl. After she died, I looked for the box, but it was gone. The fire popped in the stove, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, carrying the promise of more snow. Elias studied the twins' faces. In the flickering light, seeing the weight of secrets in their young eyes, the snow had piled high against the fence rails, turning Elias's small ranch into a landscape of white hills and shadowed hollows. Inside the cabin, warmth from the wood stove kept the winter at bay while Elias worked at his weathered workbench, fixing a broken door latch with practiced hands. The metal parts clinked softly as he manipulated them with his tools. Near the door, Luke and Lily worked together, stacking kindling, their movements more confident after 2 days in the cabin. Luke arranged the smaller pieces with careful precision while Lily sorted them by size. The routine of ranch life had begun to settle over them like a familiar blanket. The knock, when it came, was sharp and sudden. The twins froze, kindling forgotten. In their hands, Elias set down his tools and moved toward the door, his steps measured and deliberate. He opened it to find 2 men standing on his porch, their city-cut coats dusty from the trail. Despite their fine clothes, their eyes were hard as river stones. McCord, the taller one, asked, though it wasn't really a question. Snow fell silently, behind them, dotting their shoulders. That's right. Elias filled the doorframe, keeping the twins behind him. Name's Harrison. This here's Mr. Webb. The man's voice was smooth as polished wood. We represent certain financial interests in Denver. Seems Mr. Brenner had some outstanding debts. We've acquired them and everything that goes with them. Webb's cold eyes fixed on the twins, including his children. Lily's sharp intake of breath was barely audible. Luke's hand found hers, gripping tight. Children ain't property, Elias said, his voice like gravel, and they ain't for sale. Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. The way we hear it, you already proved that wrong. Bought them yourself, didn't you? But Brenner had no right to sell what was already promised as collateral. Best leave now. Elias's words carried the weight of mountains behind them. The men's gazes drifted to the Winchester, mounted on the wall, calculating. Webb's hand twitched near his coat pocket. We'll be back, Harrison said finally, with papers, proper ones. They turned and walked to their horses, mounted with fluid grace that spoke of experience in the saddle. Elias watched until they disappeared, down the snowy trail, then closed and bolted the door. The twins stood rooted to the spot, their faces pale. Elias returned to his workbench, picked up the latch again. Best finish your chores, he said quietly. Storm's coming. Throughout the afternoon they worked in silence. Elias split wood while the twins fed the livestock and gathered eggs from the henhouse. The sky grew heavy with snow, and by evening, fresh flakes were falling steady and thick. Inside, Elias prepared their supper, boiled potatoes and tender venison from his autumn hunt. The familiar smells filled the cabin as they sat down to eat. The twins picked at their food, shadows of worry still lingering in their eyes. Tell me about your mother, Elias said suddenly, breaking the silence. Both children looked up, startled. Lily set down her fork. She was Shoshone, she said softly. Beautiful. She used to sing to us in her language. She'd take us riding, Luke added, his voice growing stronger with the memory. Up into the high country, to a place she called our people's meadow. Said it was special, Lily continued. Sacred to her people. She'd gather herbs there and tell us stories about the old days. Once she told us the meadow would belong to us someday, Luke said, that it was our birthright. But Pa got angry whenever she talked about it. Elias considered this as he ate, pieces starting to fit together in his mind. This meadow, where exactly was it? Past Thunder Creek, Lily said, where the valley opens up wide with the 3 tall pines standing like sisters. The snow fell. Harder, outside, wind whistling through the eaves. Elias added more wood to the stove, watching the flames leap higher. The twins helped clean up after supper, then settled on their cot with a book Elias had given them, Later, after they had fallen asleep, Elias sat in his chair by the fire. His pipe went cold in his hand as he pondered. The meadow the twins described, he knew it. Rich grazing land, with a year-round spring, perfect for cattle. But it was far from any known gold deposits or mining claims. So why would a Denver mining syndicate care about 2 half-Shoshone children and their mother's meadow? The fire popped and sparked in the stove. Outside, snow continued to fall in the darkness, covering their tracks and making the world new again. Elias watched the flames dance, turning over questions in his mind like worn river stones. Searching for the truth hidden beneath the morning dawned, crisp and clear. The storm's fury spent at last. Fresh snow blanketed the world in pristine white, unmarked except for rabbit tracks near the barn. Elias stood on his cabin porch, breath clouding in the freezing air as he studied the brightening sky. The break in weather meant they could finally make the journey he'd been planning. Inside, he found the twins already awake, huddled near the wood stove. "We're riding to the agency today," he announced, setting bowls of steaming oatmeal before them. 3 hours north, if the road allows." Lily's eyes widened. "The Indian Agency reckons someone there might help us understand your mother's story better." Elias pulled on his heavy coat. "Eat up. We leave at first light." While the twins finished their breakfast, Elias hitched the team to his buckboard wagon. He tested the wheels, ensuring no ice had frozen in the spokes overnight. The horses stamped impatiently, their breath rising in white plumes. Soon the twins emerged, wrapped in every blanket Elias could spare. He helped them onto the wagon seat, tucking the wool around them until only their eyes showed. With a gentle slap of the reins, they set out. The journey proved challenging from the start. Deep snowdrifts blocked the main road, forcing them to pick their way carefully through the wilderness. Elias guided the team down into a frozen creek bed, the wagon wheels crunching through sheets of ice. The twins held tight as they bounced over the rough terrain. "My mama brought us this way once," Lily said softly, pointing to a stand of bare aspens. In summer, when the wild raspberries were ripe, the sun climbed higher as they traveled, but offered little warmth. Around midday, the agency buildings came into view, a cluster of wooden structures flying an American flag. Smoke rose from several chimneys, promising warmth within. A young man emerged from the main office as they approached. He wore a wool coat over clean agency clothes, his long black hair neatly tied back. "Welcome," he called out. "I am Samuel Runswith's Snow Agency interpreter." Elias helped the twins down from the wagon. "Elias McCord," he replied. "These are Lily and Luke Brenner." Samuel's expression shifted subtly at the name Brenner. He ushered them inside, where a pot of coffee steamed on a pot-bellied stove. "Please warm yourselves." The office was simply furnished but neat, with filing cabinets along one wall and maps tacked to another. Samuel poured coffee for Elias and hot tea for the twins. Once they had shed their outer layers and settled in chairs near the stove, he sat behind his desk, pen poised over paper. "Now then," he said gently, "what brings you here today?" Lily glanced at Elias, who nodded encouragingly. She straightened. In her chair, "It's about our mother," she began. "She was Shoshone. She used to take us to a special meadow, said it would be ours someday." Samuel listened intently as Lily described her memories of her mother and the meadow. His pen moved steadily across the paper, recording details. When she finished, he sat back thoughtfully. "There may be something," he said, "a clause in the last treaty that granted grazing rights to mixed-blood children of tribal members." He opened a drawer, rifling through documents. "But we would need proof your mother was registered with the tribe. Her name should be in the old agency ledgers. Should be," Elias asked. Samuel's face tightened slightly. "The ledgers from that period are missing. Last anyone saw them, they were being kept at the Mission Church in Elk Pass, along with other tribal records." Luke leaned forward. "We could look for them, perhaps," Samuel said carefully. "But if the twins do have legal rights to that land, ... double quotes, he glanced at Elias. Others might not be pleased to discover it." The implications hung heavy in the air. Elias thought of the men who had visited his cabin, their cold eyes and careful threats. By the time they left the agency, the sun had passed its peak. The return journey took even longer, as they had to navigate carefully through deepening shadows. The horses plodded steadily through the snow, their breath streaming behind them like ghost trails. The sky had turned a deep pink when they finally reached Elias's ranch. The twins hurried inside, eager for warmth, while Elias unhitched the team. As he hung up the harness in the barn, movement caught his eye. He stepped outside, scanning the tree line carefully. Shadows stretched long across the snow, and for a moment he couldn't be sure if what he saw was man or trick of fading light. The twins called from the cabin, their voices carrying clear in the winter air. Elias gave the tree line one final sweep. Before heading inside, his thoughts turning to the mission church and its missing ledgers, morning brought a crystalline beauty to the mountain homestead. Frost had worked its artistry overnight, painting delicate patterns across the cabin windows, like ethereal lace. Elias traced a finger along one swirling design while he waited for his coffee to boil, his mind already turning to the day's mission. The twins sat at the rough-hewn table, spooning up the last of their porridge. Steam rose from their bowls. Mingling with the wood smoke that curled from the pot-bellied stove, "We're riding into town today," Elias announced, pouring his coffee into a tin cup. "Going to look through some church records." Luke's spoon clattered against his bowl. "Both of us, both of you," Elias confirmed, "might need your help reading through papers." They bundled up against the cold wool scarves wound tight, mittens pulled on snug. Elias helped them into the wagon, then wrapped a heavy blanket around their shoulders. The morning sun caught the frost in the trees, making the whole world sparkle. Instead of taking the direct route, Elias guided the team along the slower trail that wound through the pines. The main road skirted a treacherous ridge where ice often formed in the shadows. He wasn't taking chances, not with precious cargo aboard. "Tell me more about your mother," he said as they traveled, reins held loose in his gloved hands. "What? Do you remember?" Lily pulled the blanket tighter. "She sang to us in Shoshone sometimes, and she'd braid my hair every morning, telling stories about our ancestors. She made the best fry bread," Luke added softly, "better than anyone." The wagon wheels creaked through fresh snow as they made their way down into Elk Pass. The town was quiet, with only a few people hurrying between buildings in the morning chill. Smoke rose straight up from chimneys in the still air. They found Reverend Josiah Calloway outside the mission church, sweeping snow from the wooden steps. He was a stooped man with silver hair and wire-rimmed spectacles that caught the light. His weathered face creased into a kind smile when he saw them. "Brother McCord," he greeted, leaning his broom against the wall. "And these must be the young ones I've heard about." His eyes held no judgment, only gentle welcome. Reverend Elias nodded. "We're hoping to look through your records, searching for something about their mother." Of course. The Reverend pulled a ring of keys from his pocket. "Come in where it's warm." The church interior smelled of pine boards and lamp oil. Reverend Calloway led them through the sanctuary to a back room lined with rough wooden shelves. Boxes and ledgers filled every available space, covered in a fine layer of dust. "These go back 30 years, he explained, pulling down a weathered box. "Marriage records, baptisms, tribal documentation. We've kept what we could," Elias settled. At a small table, the twins pulling up chairs beside him, light filtered through a high window, dust motes dancing in the beam. They began their search, carefully turning brittle pages and scanning faded handwriting. Hours passed. Luke dozed in his chair while Lily read aloud from old donation lists, her finger trailing down columns of spidery script. Elias's eyes burned from squinting at the cramped writing, but he pressed on, determination driving him forward. "Here?" Lily's voice suddenly rang out. "I found something." Elias leaned close as she pointed to an entry. There, in careful penmanship, it was written, "Naomi Shoshone, wife of Wyatt Brenner." Below followed several lines about land agreements near what was described as the Summer Meadow. Reverend Calloway peered over their shoulders. "That's from the tribal census," he confirmed, taken when the agency was first established. With trembling fingers, Elias carefully folded the precious page and tucked it inside his coat. "Much obliged, Reverend," he said, voice rough with emotion. "This means more than you know." The minister smiled, understanding in his eyes. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Brother McCord. Sometimes the truth needs a little help coming to light." By the time they left the church, heavy clouds had gathered over the mountain peaks, promising more snow. Elias hurried the twins into the wagon, eager to get home before the weather turned. The return journey was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Lily clutched her rag doll close, while Luke watched the darkening sky. The paper in Elias's coat felt like it weighed 100 pounds, a precious burden of hope and proof. They reached the cabin as the first snowflakes began to fall. Elias quickly unhitched the team and led them into the barn, making sure they were secure for the night. Inside, he built up the fire while the twins set about making a simple supper of cornbread and beans. They ate quickly, the approaching storm lending urgency to their movements. As wind began to whistle around the eaves, Elias moved through the cabin with purpose, checking and securing shutters. He brought in extra firewood, stacking it neatly by the stove. Finally, he took down his Winchester rifle and checked it carefully, making sure it was loaded and ready. The twins watched him from their place near the fire, their young faces solemn in the lamplight. The precious document remained safe in his coat pocket, proof of their heritage and possibly their future. But Elias knew that sometimes truth came with a price, and he meant to be ready for whatever the night might bring. Snow hammered against the cabin roof all through the night, the sound like thousands of tiny fists demanding entry. Elias dozed in his chair by the stove, rifle across his lap, while the twins slept soundly on their cot. The storm's fury seemed to match his own restless thoughts. Dawn brought a brief respite from the snowfall, revealing what the night had hidden. Elias stepped out onto the porch, coffee cup steaming in the crisp morning air. His eyes narrowed as they swept across the yard, catching something amiss in the pristine white blanket of snow. Tracks circled the barn, not the familiar prints of deer or coyote, but the sharp edges of men's boots. Multiple sets, from the look of it. They'd come close, testing the boundaries, seeing what they could learn about his defenses. Elias's jaw tightened. He went back inside, where Lily and Luke were just stirring from their sleep. "You'll both stay inside today," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Weather's not fit for being out. Luke's face fell. He'd been hoping to help with the horses. But one look at Elias's expression told him not to protest. To keep their minds occupied, Elias set them to productive tasks. Lily darned socks by the window, while Luke swept the wooden floor. The morning passed slowly, marked by the tick of the clock and the whisper of wind through the eaves. After their midday meal of dried apple slices and the last of yesterday's cornbread, Elias decided to teach Luke something new. He pulled out his whittling knife and selected a piece of pine from his woodbox. "Watch careful now," he said, settling next to the boy at the table. "Every spoon starts as just a piece of wood waiting to be found." Luke leaned in close eyes, intent as Elias demonstrated how to hold the knife safely, how to work with the grain instead of against it. The boy's first attempts were clumsy, but his face shone with concentration. "That's it," Elias encouraged, nice and slow. "Let the wood tell you what it wants to be." Lily abandoned her mending to watch them work. Fascinated by how the wooden spoon gradually emerged from the block of pine, the peaceful moment shattered. When hoofbeats approached the cabin, Elias was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. But his tension eased slightly when he recognized the rider through the frost-touched window. Samuel Runswisno dismounted quickly, his breath clouding. In the cold air, his usually calm face was creased with worry as Elias opened the door. "McCord," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "The syndicate men were at the agency this morning. They're preparing legal papers to contest the twins' claim in court." Elias nodded grimly. "We found proof yesterday. Their mother's name recorded clear as day in the church books. Notes about the land, too." Samuel's eyes widened slightly. "That's good news, but—" He glanced at the twins, then lowered his voice. "Be ready for trouble. These men, they don't usually let papers and courts stand in their way." "Figured as much," Elias replied, his hand unconsciously moving to touch the folded document in his shirt pocket. "Much obliged for the warning." Samuel declined the offer of coffee, saying he needed to return before dark. As he mounted up, he added, "I'll send word when I learn more. Watch your back, friend." Evening crept in early, as it always did in winter. Elias prepared a simple supper of boiled potatoes and salt pork, the familiar smells filling the cabin. The twins ate quietly, the day's tension wearing on them. Finally, Lily set down her fork. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice small in the lamplight. What if they try to take us away? Elias looked at her steadily, seeing not just a frightened child, but a brave soul who'd already endured too much. He bowed his head, and the twins followed suit without prompting. Lord, he prayed, his deep voice gentle in the quiet cabin, we thank you for watching over us this far. Thank you for this roof, this food, and most especially for bringing these children safe to harbor. Whatever comes, help us remember you're with us through the storm. Amen, the twins murmured together. Outside, the wind picked up again, howling around the corners of the cabin like a hungry wolf. Elias added wood to the stove until it was full, making sure they'd stay warm through the night. Time for bed, he told the twins, helping them arrange their blankets. Once they were settled, Elias pulled on his heavy coat and checked his revolver. The metal was cold against his palm as he stepped out into the darkness. The barn lantern cast yellow light across the snow as he made his rounds. Checking doors and listening to the nervous shuffling of the horses in their stalls, everything was secure, but the night felt watchful, waiting. Back inside, he hung his coat by the door, revolver still close at hand. The twins were already asleep, their faces peaceful despite the day's worries. Elias settled into his chair by the stove, prepared for another long night of vigilance as the storm raged outside. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. Elias had been up since before first light, preparing for the journey to the Indian Agency. He'd already fed the livestock and packed provisions. Knowing the winter trail would be treacherous, the twins huddled near the stove, wrapped in wool blankets while they ate their morning porridge. Elias folded the precious church document carefully, securing it inside his coat pocket. We'll need to make good time, he told them, checking the leather straps of their heavy coats. Storm's coming later, according to my bones. Outside, his breath clouded in the frigid air as he hitched the team to the wagon. The horses stamped restlessly. He helped the twins up onto the wagon seat, tucking a buffalo robe around their legs before climbing up himself. The wagon wheels creaked as they started down the trail, frost crackling beneath the iron-rimmed wheels. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow-packed path, making it difficult to spot dangerous patches of ice. Their first close call came at Beaver Creek Crossing. The wagon wheels hit a sheet of black ice hidden beneath a dusting of snow. The whole rig slewed sideways, nearly pitching them into the frozen creek bed. Elias hauled on the reins, speaking low and steady to the spooked horses while the twins clung to the seat. Hold tight now, he murmured, easing the wagon back onto safer ground. Lily's face was pale, but she managed a brave smile. The second near disaster struck as they navigated a steep switchback. Ice had formed in deep ruts, and the wagon slipped toward a sharp drop-off. Elias's muscles strained as he fought to keep them on the trail. Luke pressed against his side, eyes wide but silent, when they finally reached the agency. Samuel Runs-with-No was waiting outside, as if he'd known they were coming. His dark eyes took in their wind-blown appearance as he helped the twins down. From the wagon, come inside, where it's warm, he said, leading them to his office. A pot of coffee steamed on the pot-bellied stove, and Samuel poured cups for everyone, even small ones with milk for the twins. Elias produced the document, handling it like the precious thing it was. Samuel studied the church records carefully, nodding as he read. "This is good," he said finally. "Very good. The mother's name, the land notation, is what we needed." He began preparing official papers, his pen scratching across agency letterhead. "The circuit judge arrives next week. He'll review everything then." "A week's a long time," Elias said quietly, watching the twins warm their hands around their cups. Samuel's expression was grave. "Yes, be careful, my friend." The morning had burned away to afternoon by the time they finished filing the papers. Heavy clouds were building in the west as they hitched up for the return journey. They needed supplies, so Elias guided the wagon down Elk Pass's Main Street to Dawson's Trading Post. Inside the store, the usual mix of frontier merchandise filled the shelves: tools, dry goods, ammunition. But something felt wrong. A man in a dark coat stood near the back, pretending to examine canned goods. His gloved hand never strayed far from his gun belt. Elias positioned himself between the stranger and the twins. "Luke, help your sister gather what we need, quick now." They moved efficiently through their list: flour, coffee, lamp oil. Elias kept one eye on their shopping and one on the dark-coated man, who watched them with predatory patience. Old Man Dawson's hands shook slightly as he totaled their purchases. He'd been in town long enough to smell trouble brewing. "Weather's turning bad," he said, his voice a bit too loud. "Best hurry home." They loaded the supplies quickly. The sky had turned the color of old pewter, heavy with the promise of snow. Elias clucked to the horses, eager to be away from town and watching eyes. The return trip was tense but uneventful. They reached the cabin as the first snowflakes began to fall. After unhitching the team and storing the supplies, Elias got the twins settled inside. "Time for your lessons," he said, setting them up at the table near the warm stove. He placed their primers before them dog-eared books salvaged from the church's donation box. "Work on your letters while there's still good light." Luke bent over his book, tongue caught between his teeth as he carefully copied the alphabet. Lily was already reading simple sentences, her finger tracking across the pages. Elias took up position near the window, an axe across his knees, the blade kneaded. Attention winter was hard on Tuilzand. The familiar rhythm of stone against steel helped him think. The twins' soft murmuring of letters and words provided a gentle counterpoint to the scraping sound. Through the gathering dusk, movement caught his eye. A rider at the edge of the tree line, barely visible through the falling snow. The figure sat motionless for a long moment, then turned away when Elias's gaze fell upon him. The whetstone paused in its arc across the axe blade. Elias watched until the rider disappeared into the growing darkness, leaving nothing but shadows and swirling snow behind. 3 days of quiet settled over the snow-covered homestead like a soft blanket. The winter sun traced its low arc across the sky, while Elias put the time to good use, teaching the twins the skills they'd need to survive on the frontier in the crisp morning air. He showed Luke how to swing an axe properly, guiding the boys. "Smaller hands on the worn wooden handle, let the weight do the work," he explained, demonstrating the motion. No need to force it. Luke's first few attempts bounced off the log, but by midday, he was splitting kindling with growing confidence. Lily proved to have a natural touch with leatherwork. Her small fingers were nimble as Elias taught her to repair a broken harness. Strap. Sometimes the smallest fixes make the difference between getting home safe or being stranded. Watching as she carefully pushed the awl through the tough leather, both twins learned to set snares for rabbits, their breath visible in the cold air as they practiced with loops of twine. "The trick is thinking like the rabbit," Elias explained, showing them how to place the loops along well-worn paths in the snow. "They're creatures of habit, just like most folks." The peaceful rhythm of their days shattered when Marshal Harlan's horse appeared on the trail, sending up puffs of powder snow with each step. Elias was in the barn, showing the twins how to curry the horses when he heard the approaching hoofbeats. Inside, he told them quietly, "Quick now, Lee, quick now." The marshal's face was grim as he dismounted. His badge caught the winter sunlight as he walked to where Elias waited. "Judd Coulter's in town," Harlan said, without preamble, "brought 6 hard cases with him. Been asking questions about you and the twins." He stamped his feet against the cold. "They're staying at the Grand Hotel, but they ain't the type to sleep much." Elias nodded slowly, much obliged for the warning. "You could pack up, head north to the agency until this blows over." The marshal's eyes were concerned. "No shame in living to fight another day. Can't run." Elias's voice was quiet but firm. "Those children need stability, not fear. Besides, running just postpones the real fight." Harlan sighed, adjusting his hat. "Figured you'd say that just..." "Watch your back, Elias. Coulter's got a reputation. Man kills from a distance, using others to do his dirty work." After the marshal rode away, Elias found the twins in the cabin, trying to look busy. He could see the worry in their eyes. They'd grown too used to reading trouble in adult faces. "Come on," he said, pulling out a sack of flour. Soon they were all 3 at the table, hands covered in flour as they kneaded the dough. Lily giggled when Luke got flour on his nose, and even Elias managed a small smile. As the bread rose near the stove, Elias took down his old Bible, its leather cover smooth from years of handling, his deep voice filling the cabin with ancient words of comfort. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The twins listened, their faces thoughtful in the lamplight. When he finished reading, Luke asked, "Did our mother have a Bible?" "Don't rightly know," Elias answered honestly. but I expect she had her own ways of talking to the Creator. That night, after a simple supper of fresh bread and stew, Elias took extra care with the evening routine. He checked every window, secured the shutters, and double-barred the heavy door. The twins watched silently from their cot as he loaded his Winchester and propped it. Within easy reach of his bed, the cabin creaked and settled in the cold night air. Elias dozed lightly, years of frontier living having taught him to sleep with one ear open. Sometime after midnight, a sound pulled him fully awake, the faint scrape of metal on metal. Like someone testing the door latch, moving silently, he eased out of bed, rifle in hand. The twins were still sleeping soundly. He positioned himself away from the windows, listening intently. For several long moments, the only sound was the winter wind. Then came another tiny scratch at the latch, barely audible. Elias waited, scarcely breathing. But the sound didn't repeat. Eventually, the wind died down, leaving only the deep silence of a snow-covered night. He maintained his vigil until false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. When true morning came, he found fresh tracks in the new-fallen snow. Boot prints. Circled the cabin and led off toward town, already beginning to fill with powder from the constantly falling snow. He studied them carefully, noting the pattern of at least 3 different sets of boots. Inside, he found the twins already up, trying to rebuild the fire in the stove. Their faces showed they knew something had happened in the night, but they didn't ask. Instead, Lily silently handed him a cup of coffee, while Luke added wood to the growing flames. Elias accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks, watching as the snow continued to fall outside the window, slowly erasing all signs of the night's visitors. But he knew they'd be back. Men like that always came back. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Elias helped the twins into their Sunday clothes, freshly brushed and mended. He hitched the wagon while they wrapped themselves in blankets against the biting wind. The trip to town was slow. Ice crackling under the wagon wheels, Batheld Elk Pass's little white church stood proud against the winter sky. Townsfolk filed in, nodding greetings or looking away as Elias helped Luke and Lily down from the wagon. Inside, the wood stove's warmth wrapped around them as they settled into a back pew. Lily smoothed her dress nervously, while Luke sat straight-backed. Trying to look brave, Reverend Calloway stepped to the pulpit, his kind eyes sweeping over the congregation. His sermon rang with purpose, speaking of standing firm in times of trial. "The Lord tests the righteous," he quoted, "and those who remain steadfast shall be rewarded." Elias felt the words settle in his chest like warm coals. After the final hymn faded, they stepped out into the brittle sunlight. Elias led the twins toward the livery to check on their wagon. That's when Judd Coulter emerged from the shadows between buildings, like a snake uncoiling. His expensive coat couldn't hide the predator's grace in his movement. McCord Coulter said, his smile cold as winter frost. Been meaning to have a word. His eyes flicked to the twins, who pressed closer to Elias's sides. "About that property matter? Nothing to discuss," Elias replied, his voice level. Coulter's smile thinned. "Now, see there is. Those papers you're chasing. They're worthless. Hand over the property now. Save yourself some grief." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Elias felt small hands grip his coat. "They're children," he said flatly, "not property." "Everything's property to someone," Coulter answered softly. "Remember that." He touched the brim of his hat and stepped aside, his men following like shadows. The ride home was silent, broken only by the creak of harness, leather, and the whisper of wind across snow, jumping at every pop from the stove. After the dishes were cleared, Elias stepped outside. The evening air bit at his face as he stood at the fence line, studying the frozen meadow that stretched away into darkness. Worth risking everything, maybe even their lives, for a piece of paper and some grazing rights. Small boots crunched in the snow behind him. Lily's mittened hand slipped into his warm and trusting. She didn't speak, just stood beside him, gazing out at the land that was her birthright. In that moment, he knew, yes, it was worth every bit of the fight ahead. 2 days crept by like molasses in winter. The twins kept watch at the window while Elias tended to chores, all of them waiting for word about the papers. The agency clerk certified everything, Samuel said, stamping snow from his boots at the door. His breath came out in white clouds as he handed over a thick envelope. "It is official now." Elias took the papers carefully, nodding his thanks. He climbed onto a chair and tucked them high on the shelf above the stove, where they would stay dry and safe. Lily clapped her hands while Luke grinned, the first real smile Elias had seen from the boy in days. "This calls for something special," Elias declared. He pulled out the tin of biscuit flour he had been saving and set to work while Samuel shared news from town of wild honey, letting the twins drizzle the amber sweetness over their portions. They were washing up the supper dishes when Luke spotted it first an orange glow through the window that shouldn't be there. "Fire!" he shouted, pointing toward the barn. Elias grabbed a bucket and ran outside, snow crunching under his boots. Flames were already climbing the barn's rear wall, hungry tongues of fire licking at the dry wood. Elias shouted, but they ignored him, hurling their snow at the base of the flames. For 20 desperate minutes, they fought the fire together, passing buckets and pails in a frantic line. Finally, the last flame sputtered and died, leaving the barn's skeleton standing but scorched dot in the smoky aftermath. Elias checked the damage. Most of the structure could be saved, though the back wall would need rebuilding. Near the barn door, something caught his Aja matchbox, lying in the trampled snow. He picked it up, turning it in the lantern light. The label read, "Silver Dollar Saloon, Denver," in fancy lettering. Coulter's men had left their calling card. Inside the cabin, Lily and Luke huddled near the stove, faces still smudged with soot. Elias settled into his chair, laying his shotgun across his knees. He would not sleep deeply tonight. The smell of smoke hung in the air like a promise of violence to come. The morning sun cast long shadows across the frozen yard as Elias loaded the wagon. His breath formed clouds in the bitter air while he worked, mind churning over his decision. "Get your coats on," he told the twins who sat at the table finishing their cornmeal mush. "We're heading to the mission church." Lily clutched her ragdoll clothes. "Why, Reverend Calloway will keep you safe until the papers are signed proper in front of witnesses." Elias wrapped the precious documents in oilcloth and tucked them inside his coat. They set out just as dawn broke over the mountains, the wagon wheels crunching through fresh snow. Luke sat between his sister and Elias, scanning the trees like a young hawk. The cold bit through their layers of wool and cotton. Halfway down Elk Pass, where the trail narrowed between rocky outcrops, the crack of a rifle shot shattered the morning quiet. Splinters flew from a tree trunk beside them. 3 riders appeared on the trail ahead, rifles raised. "Down," Elias shouted, yanking the reins hard. The wagon lurched into a dense thicket of young pines. "Jump! Hide in the trees!" The twins scrambled over the back, disappearing into the undergrowth. Elias grabbed his Winchester and rolled behind a fallen log. Another shot kicked up snow near his boot. "That's far enough, McCord," one rider called out. "Hand over them papers." Elias answered with the Winchester, the shot catching one rider in the shoulder. The man yelled and nearly fell from his saddle. 2 more rounds flew past Elias's head as he worked the lever action. "Ain't worth dying over," another rider shouted, but Elias could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The firefight lasted several tense minutes. Finally, the wounded man groaned, "Let's go." They wheeled their horses around and galloped back down the trail, leaving only hoofprints and spent cartridges in the snow. Elias waited until their sounds faded before calling softly, "Lily, Luke." They emerged from the pines, faces pale but unharmed. The rest of their journey passed in tense silence, all 3 scanning for any movement along the trail. Night was falling when they finally reached the mission church, its windows glowing with LAMPLIGHT. Reverend Calloway opened the door at their knock, his eyes widening at their trail-worn appearance. "Good Lord, come in before you freeze." "What happened, Coulter's men?" Elias said simply, ushering the twins inside. "We need a safe place until morning." "You'll stay here tonight," the Reverend insisted, already stoking the pot-bellied stove. No one would dare bring violence to God's house. Dawn painted the eastern sky in streaks of pale gold as Elias stepped out of the mission church. Frost crackled under his boots, and his breath formed clouds in the frigid morning air. Inside, Lily and Luke still slept on pallets near the stove. Wrapped in thick quilts the Reverend had provided, "I'll watch over them like my own," Reverend Calloway promised, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Go see about that signing." Elias mounted his horse and rode the quiet streets into town. The courthouse stood silent, its windows dark. He waited on the steps until the clerk arrived, stamping his feet against the cold. When the man finally opened up, Elias learned the news he'd been hoping for. The signing was set for the next evening at 7 o'clock. Relief warmed his chest as he turned his horse back toward the church. Maybe things would work out right after. All the morning sun had risen higher, making the snow-covered ground sparkle like scattered diamonds. His hope shattered the moment he saw the church door standing open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Inside, the pallets lay empty, quilts tossed aside. Reverend Calloway wrung his hands, face etched with worry. "2 men came," the Reverend explained, voice shaking. "Said you'd sent them to fetch the children." "I should have known better." "Should have which way?" Elias demanded, already moving toward the door. Toward the pass. They were mounted, had the twins ride double with them. Elias burst outside, scanning the ground. Fresh hoofprints marked the snow, heading north. He swung onto his horse and spurred it forward, following the trail. Snow flew from his horse's hooves as they galloped along the frozen path. An hour into his pursuit, he spotted a familiar figure on horseback. Samuel Runs-with-Snow, wrapped in a thick blanket coat. The young interpreter raised a hand in greeting. "I saw them pass," Samuel said without preamble. "I know where they're headed. There's an old line shack up near Timber Creek where outlaws sometimes hole up." "Show me," Elias growled. Their horses onto a narrow trail that wound up the mountainside. The wind grew stronger as they climbed, whipping snow from the tree branches overhead. Samuel led the way with confidence, despite the deteriorating conditions. Not much further, Samuel called back over his shoulder as they pressed on through. The strengthening gale, the shack, lies just over the next ridge. The wind howled like a wounded beast as Elias and Samuel approached the line shack. Snow drove sideways into their faces, the icy particles stinging their skin. Through the swirling white, a faint golden glow leaked from a grimy window. Confirming someone was inside, Elias dismounted, his boots crunching in the fresh powder. He drew his revolver, checking that the cylinder was fully loaded. Samuel tied their horses in a sheltered spot behind a stand of pine trees, then crept forward to join him. "I'll circle around back," Samuel whispered, his words nearly lost in the wind. Elias nodded and edged closer to the shack's front door. Through a gap in the rough-hewn logs, he could make out movement inside. His heart clenched when he heard Lily's muffled sob. The wooden boards of the porch creaked beneath his weight as he positioned himself beside the door. Inside, a man's voice, young, uncertain, carried through the thin walls. "Maybe we should. Just let them go, boss. Weather's getting worse. Shut your mouth, Jenkins." That was Coulter's voice, hard as iron. "We'll wait it out here until morning." Elias took a deep breath, then kicked the door open. The hinges groaned as it swung wide, letting in a swirl of snow. In the lantern light, he saw Coulter standing near the back wall, gripping the twins' shoulders. A younger man, Jenkins, paced near a pot-bellied stove, his gun hand trembling. "Let them go, Coulter," Elias said, his voice steady despite the rage. Burning in his chest, "Take me instead." Coulter's thin lips twisted into a sneer. "You think I'm fool enough to trade 2 valuable claims for 1 worn-out scout? This ain't right, Mr. Coulter." Jenkins suddenly spoke up, lowering his pistol. "They're just kids. My PA would tan my hide if he knew I was part of something like this." Confusion flickered across Coulter's face at this betrayal. In that moment of hesitation, Samuel slipped through the back door like a shadow. He gestured to the twins, who broke free from Coulter's loosened grip and ran toward him. "No," Coulter snarled, reaching for his holster, but Samuel was faster, tackling him from behind. The syndicate leader's gun clattered across the wooden floor. As they struggled, Elias kept his revolver trained on Jenkins, but the young man had already backed away, hands raised. "I want no part of this," he said, shame coloring his voice. Together, Elias and Samuel subdued Coulter, binding his hands with leather straps from Samuel's saddlebag. The syndicate leader spat curses as they secured him to a support post. "The Marshal will find you when the storm passes," Elias told him. "Kidnapping's a hanging offense in this territory." Outside, the storm had strengthened into a full blizzard. Elias lifted Lily onto his horse, while Samuel helped Luke mount up behind him. They set off down the mountain, the wind screaming around them and snow obscuring the trail. Samuel led them. his knowledge of the land proving invaluable as they picked their way through the darkness. The twins huddled against their rescuers, shivering despite the heavy blankets wrapped around them. Ours passed in a white blur of cold and wind. The horses plodded forward, heads lowered against the storm. Finally, as the eastern sky began to lighten behind the clouds, the shape of the mission church emerged from the swirling snow. Reverend Calloway was waiting at the door, a lantern held high. "Thank the Lord," he breathed, as they stumbled inside. Bringing a swirl of snow with them, the twins immediately huddled near the stove, where a fresh fire crackled. The first light of dawn was just beginning to paint the windows as Elias helped the children settle onto their pallets. They were safe. Against all odds, they were safe. The mission church glowed with lamplight as the setting sun painted the windows amber. Every pew was filled ranchers in their Sunday best, miners with clean scrubbed faces, and townspeople who had heard about the remarkable case of 2 children and their unlikely guardian. Near the altar, Reverend Calloway adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles. Reviewing the papers one final time, 3 Shoshone elders sat in the front row, their dignified presence commanding respect. Their traditional dress stood in stark contrast to the townspeople's attire, yet their bearing spoke of authority that transcended such differences. Samuel Runs with Snow stood nearby, ready to translate if needed. Marshal Harlan leaned against the wall near the door, his badge catching the lamplight. His presence ensured order, though the tension that had gripped the town seemed to have dissolved with Coulter's arrest. Word had spread that the syndicate leader's men had scattered like autumn leaves in a wind. Wanting no part of kidnapping charges, the twins sat close to Elias, their clothes neat but simple. Lily smoothed her dress nervously, while Luke's fingers fidgeted with his collar. Elias placed a reassuring hand on each of their shoulders, his own heart beating faster as the judge took his place at the church's small writing desk. "We are gathered," Reverend Calloway began, his voice carrying to the rafters, "to witness justice being done and to see God's hand in bringing family together through unexpected means." The judge, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, dipped his pen in ink. First came the confirmation of the twins' grazing rights, inherited through their mother Naomi's tribal connections. Then followed the guardianship papers, legally binding Elias to the children as their father in the eyes of both territory and tribal law. Samuel stepped forward to translate the proceedings for the elders, who nodded their approval. One elder stood, speaking in Shoshone, while Samuel interpreted, "The children of our daughter Naomi will walk in both worlds, with a good man to guide them." This is well. Tears glistened in Lily's eyes as the judge handed the papers to Elias. Luke stood straighter, pride replacing his usual wariness. The assembled townspeople broke into applause, some wiping away tears of their own. 3 days later, spring arrived like a gentle awakening. The snow retreated up the mountainsides, revealing tender green shoots beneath. Elias loaded the wagon with their belongings, and they made the short journey to the meadow cabin, their new home. The cabin needed work, but its bones were sound. Luke proved especially helpful with repairs, showing a natural talent for carpentry. As they fixed loose boards and patched the roof, Lily cleared a patch for a kitchen garden, carefully planting the seeds Samuel had brought from the agency traditional plants her mother would have grown. Together they mended the fence line, the rhythm of their work punctuated by meadowlark songs. Even the horses seemed to sense the rightness of it all, contentedly grazing in the fresh spring grass as evening settled over the land. They gathered around the table in their snug cabin. Steam rose from fresh-baked bread, its yeasty aroma mixing with the spring air through the open window. Luke's grin flashed bright as he reached for a second slice. A far cry from the wary boy of weeks past, Lily hummed softly as she spread butter on her bread. Shoshone melody her mother had sung, one that spoke of belonging and home. The familiar tune filled the cabin with warmth deeper than any fire could provide. Elias leaned back in his chair, watching his children with quiet joy. The last rays of sunlight streamed through the window, turning Lily's dark hair to copper pop, she said suddenly, the word falling naturally from her lips for the first time. "Would you like more bread?" Elias's heart swelled as he smiled at her. "Much obliged, little one," he said softly. Then, looking at them both, he added, "You were sold to me as punishment, but the Lord sent you as a gift." The twins' answering smiles were brighter than the sunset outside, And in that moment, Elias knew with certainty that their family, unexpected and hard won, was exactly as it was meant to be. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.